So I guess the net status event, what I'll do is I'm actually just going to go back to my browser here, and I'm just going to pop that in here and look it up, because there's a certain code that I'm looking for that will tell me if it's working, essentially. There it is. Net connection. Is that the one? Let's see. Yeah, that must be it. Net connection.connect.success. So that's kind of the code that we're looking for from that event. So I'll go back to this net status handler here, and I'm going to create a switch statement. And I'm just going to use the event.info.code. And that's that code I just copied from the website there. I'm going to create a case for it. Paste that in there. So if the net status event triggers this code, then we're going to want to create a function to get the rest of the program running here. So I'm going to call that setup and launch. And I'll just do break here. Now, this is just going to kind of be bare bones. At this point, you would probably set up a case for a bunch of these other events, just to kind of handle different things that are happening, so that you don't handle all your errors and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do basically the least amount of stuff I have to actually just make this work. So the next thing I need to do is set up this setup and launch function. So I'm going to do that now. Say private function, and I'll paste that in there and return void as well. Okay, so at this point we need to set up our net stream. So I'm going to say equals new net stream, and I'm going to use the net connection that we had set up before, which is called end connection. And then I'm going to create a variable called custom client. This may actually be I may need to just quickly go over this for a second. One thing I did notice when I was setting this up and I was using this as a reference, one thing I noticed that they've done here is they've used, let me see if I can find it here, right here. So here's their net stream, and apparently you need to use a client, and this is sort of like just a way for something to handle all the events that are happening. So what they do here is they use stream.client equals custom client. This didn't work for me, so I had to do it slightly differently. So if you might want to try this. This may work for you. Apparently it's supposed to work, but it just didn't seem to fly for me. So the way I did it was I created a variable called custom client, and I made that an object. I just said equals new object. Okay, and then I attached that object as the client. So I said netstream dot client equals custom client, and that seemed to work for me. So give it a shot. Hopefully that'll work. So now the video that we created at the top here, what we need to do is we need to attach the stream to it. So we'll say video dot attach net stream, and we're going to say end stream, and then we're going to play the net stream. So we'll say end stream dot play, and it's looking for parameters. I don't have any, so I'm just going to say null. And like I said, you can expand this if you want to make it a little bit more functional, but this is, like I said, going to be quite bare bones. This is going to be the bare minimum. Okay, so now we need to set up our native process. So the first thing that we need to run a native process is the startup info. So I'm just going to say native process startup info, and I'm going to make it a native process startup info. There we go. And we'll say equals new native process startup info. It's a lot of typing. So now we need to attach an executable file to that startup info. So I'll start to type that out. Hopefully it'll allow me to get to it easily. I'm going to say executable equals, and that's the file that we created up there called ffmpeg. So that's the file that we're going to feed in, which is going to be our executable file. Okay. All right. So the next step is to create our arguments. Now this is where it gets maybe a little bit more complicated, but I'm going to just call it process args. and that has to be a vector. I thought that you could use an array, but apparently it must be a vector, so we're going to make it a vector of the type string, and we'll say equals new vector string. Perfect. And we need one of these. Done. Great. So now we're going to push in all the arguments that we need to transcode the video. So basically the way that works, like if I open up my terminal here, I can type in ffmpeg, and then I type in a series of arguments that will tell ffmpeg what I want it to do. So I can tell it I want the input to be, and I could just say, you know, test.avi. That's the file I want to feed into ffmpeg, and then that's sort of what we're doing here. That's what these arguments are. So I'm going to say process args dot push, and we're going to start pushing in our arguments. So I'm just going to close that right away here. So the first thing we need to tell it is, like I said before, the input, where it's getting its file from. And we want to use the path that we fed in before. So we'll say video path. So that's the argument that follows that. The next argument we want to give it is the video bit rate we want it to use. Now the order doesn't necessarily matter, but it does in some cases. I've had better luck just using this particular order. Sometimes when you kind of fool around with the order of the arguments, it can change what you actually want it to do. But for me, this seemed to work fairly well. I'm going to change the bit rate, and I'm going to make it specifically about the video. And then I'm going to make that 4800K. So it's quite a nice bit rate. Excuse me. And then I'm going to tell it what I want for the audio rate. And in my case, I just used 44.1, which seemed to be fairly successful. The next thing I'm going to tell it is how many channels, audio channels, I want it to have, and in my case it's 2, because if I don't think that I don't know this for sure, but I don't think that FLV supports 5.1 or anything like that. So I just wanted to make it simple, 2 channels of audio. That's it. Now at this point, I want to I want to feed in another argument here, and I want to include a format. So the format I want it to use is FLV. Okay, I want to force it to transcode this video, whatever I'm giving it, into FLV. And then the final command I'm going to use is just one single dash, and that essentially means it's just going to start streaming it. And even though it doesn't have any particular destination at this point, it will still just transcode it and stream it. And we're going to use a bit array to grab that stream and push it into the Flash player. So that's the basic concept. So here's all the arguments, and we should be good to go at that point. So let's attach those arguments to our native process startup information. So go ahead and do that, and we'll say arguments. There it is, and that's going to be the process args. There we go.